when a black millionaire walked into his co-worker's party wearing simple clothes. Everyone laughed at him. The security guard kicked him from behind, and police arrested him like a criminal. But when this case landed in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, the truth that came out shook the entire country and left America stunned, silent, and furious. Before we continue, hit the like button, subscribe for more unbelievable real-life stories, and comment below which country or which state you're watching from. The low hum of laughter floated through the rooftop lounge of the Atlanta skyline as the annual Nexus Tech corporate celebration came alive with glittering gowns, tailored suits, and the self-satisfied smiles of people who believed they knew exactly who mattered in the room. No one noticed the elevator doors opening on the far side, no one except the bartender, when a tall black man stepped in, wearing simple jeans, a clean navy jacket, and worn brown shoes. He didn't look like he belonged among the champagne flutes and designer watches. At least, that's what everyone assumed the moment he took 3 steps forward. His name was Marcus Hale, though no one here seemed to remember it. They all knew the company's CEO, CFO, and department heads. But no one ever cared to learn the name of the man who had silently invested the first $20 million that saved the company from collapse 6 years ago. Marcus never pushed his face in front of cameras. He never took photos, never attended press events. He simply built and built, quietly, steadily, until his net worth had grown to 9 figures, and Nexus Tech owed its very survival to a man they could not recognize, even when he stood under their chandelier. Marcus scanned the room, searching for familiar faces. He had come only because his old friend David insisted. "You built this foundation, man. They should see you once." But as Marcus walked past the snack table, he overheard a sharp whisper behind him. "Who invited the janitor?" "Nah, looks more like some delivery guy." "Bro walked into the wrong floor." A wave of chuckles rolled behind him, casual and poisonous. Marcus kept walking, jaw tight, hands calm. He'd spent a lifetime knowing people judge status by clothing rather than contribution. But tonight, this sting felt sharper. Maybe because he had actually expected better from the people whose paychecks existed because of him. At the far corner, a group of junior executives noticed him and smirked. One of them raised a glass. "Hey, sir, the service exit is downstairs. This is a private event." Marcus nodded slightly. "I work with Nexus Tech," he replied softly. "You work with Nexus Tech?" One scoffed. "Doing what?" "Carpet cleaning." More laughter. Someone even pulled out their phone to film him. Before Marcus could respond, a large hand clamped onto his shoulder. A security guard, muscular, impatient, and clearly convinced of his authority, stepped in front of Marcus with a hard glare. "Sir, you can't be here. Step out, now." "I'm here for the celebration," Marcus said, still calm. "I'm not causing trouble." "You're trespassing," the guard snapped. "Move." Marcus tried to take out his phone to call his friend David, but the guard misread it deliberately. Or maybe chose not to care. In an instant, he shoved Marcus backward. The crowd gasped. A few filmed. No one intervened. The guard took 1 step closer. Then, in front of 100 expensive shoes and glittering dresses, he kicked Marcus hard from behind, sending him forward onto the polished floor. A roar of laughter exploded. A few murmured, "Oh, damn, he deserved that." Someone whispered, "Why is security even wasting time? Toss him." The guard grabbed Marcus by the arm, yanking him upright as though he were nothing more than a problem to be removed. "You're leaving," he growled. "I'm calling the cops." Marcus steadied himself, breathing slowly, refusing to let rage or humiliation take over. "Call them," he said quietly. "I'd like to file a report too." The guard didn't like that. Seconds later, blue lights flashed against the glass windows as two officers entered the party. The room instantly shifted. People straightened, fixed their hair, pretended they cared. The guard spoke loudly. This guy broke in, causing disruption. The officers didn't even ask Marcus a question. They grabbed his wrists, snapped cold cuffs around them, and began walking him out as though he were a threat. But as Marcus reached the elevator, his eyes caught the reflection in the mirror, his cuffed hands, the guards smirking behind him, the executives laughing like children. And something inside him settled. Not anger, not hurt, just a decision. This time, he wasn't staying silent. By the time he reached the precinct that night, the officers had no idea that the man they booked was the quiet majority shareholder of the very company hosting the party. 2 days later, the charges were officially filed. And that's when the case, humiliation, assault, false arrest, corporate discrimination, landed in the courtroom of Judge Frank Caprio, where no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what the truth would unleash. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Providence Municipal Court as the murmurs of a crowded hallway echoed like a restless storm. Reporters gathered with cameras drawn. Employees from Nexus Tech whispered nervously as they recognized the security guard who stood stiffly near the defense attorney. No one cared about the man he had kicked out of the rooftop party. No one even remembered his name. Inside Courtroom 3B, Judge Frank Caprio reviewed the case file with a slow, thoughtful breath. The charges were simple on paper: trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting removal. But the judge paused, brows knitting slightly. Something didn't feel right. He closed the folder softly and waited for the bailiff to bring everyone in. When Marcus Hale entered the courtroom, dressed in a clean dark blazer and calm determination, people stared again. But differently this time. He wasn't a nobody in wrinkled jeans anymore. He carried himself with a quiet authority that made even the spectators straighten. Still, whispers fluttered like moths. That's the guy who got kicked out. Why didn't he dress properly at the party? I heard he tried to fight security. Marcus ignored them and sat beside his attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Alyssa Rowan, who had agreed to represent him after hearing the bizarre details. Judge Caprio looked at Marcus for a long moment, not judging, just observing. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," he said warmly. "We're here to understand exactly what happened. You'll have your chance to speak." The prosecutor, a brisk man named Carter Briggs, began with a confident stride. "Your Honor, the defendant entered a private corporate event without permission. He ignored multiple requests to leave and caused a scene that required law enforcement intervention." Judge Caprio nodded. "I see. And the security guard?" The guard, Evan Doyle, mid-30s, thick arms, practiced arrogance, stood and puffed his chest. "Your Honor, the man was suspicious. He refused to identify himself. He reached for something in his pocket. I acted to protect the guests." Marcus looked up slowly, eyes steady. Alyssa rose, calm but razor-sharp. "Permission to play the first recording, Your Honor?" Judge Caprio leaned forward. "Recording?" Alyssa tapped her tablet. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as video footage from a partygoer's phone appeared on the monitor. The rooftop lounge glowed in the night. Laughter, champagne. Then Marcus appeared, quiet, composed, simply walking. The executives laughing behind him, the insults, the mockery, the guard grabbing him abruptly, and then the kick. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The video didn't lie. Evan Doyle didn't escort him. He assaulted him, hard. Judge Caprio's face hardened. "Mr. Doyle, is that accurate?" The guard swallowed visibly. He was reaching for something. Alyssa immediately clicked forward on the video. Frame by frame, the moment played again. Marcus reached into his pocket, but only for a cell phone. A normal gesture. Calm, non-threatening. Judge Caprio exhaled deeply. "Mr. Doyle, that is not a man reaching for a weapon. That is a man reaching for a phone." The guard's jaw tightened. Sweat lined his forehead. But Allison wasn't done. "Your Honor, we have additional evidence. A second angle." Another video, this one clearer, filmed by a horrified intern who had been too afraid to intervene that night. It showed the smirks, the mocking comments, the shove, and then the officers handcuffing Marcus without asking a single question. The judge removed his glasses. "Mr. Briggs, do you still maintain these charges have merit?" The prosecutor's confidence cracked. Your Honor, the officers believed." Judge Caprio raised a hand gently. "We will get to the officers. But first, Mr. Hale, do you wish to speak?" Marcus stood slowly. His voice was steady, but wounded pride trembled beneath the surface. "I walked into a party hosted by the company I helped build," he said quietly. "I didn't dress like the rest of them. But I didn't expect to be humiliated, assaulted, or arrested for existing in a space I had every right to be in." The entire room went silent. Alyssa stepped closer. "Your Honor, the prosecution claims Mr. Hale had no association with Nexus Tech. That claim is false. My client is not an intruder. He is—" She stopped. The judge watched her. Everyone leaned forward. Marcus stepped in, his voice calm but carrying weight like iron. "Your Honor, I'm one of the primary investors of Nexus Tech. The company does not exist without my funding." The courtroom exploded in whispers. Even Judge Caprio leaned back, eyebrows rising. "You're an investor?" "Not just an investor," Alyssa added. "He owns 28% of the company." The security guard's face drained of color. The prosecutor blinked rapidly, suddenly aware he had been swinging at the wrong target. Judge Caprio placed both hands on the bench, his tone shifting, firm, protective, deeply human. "Mr. Hale, what happened to you that night is not trespassing. It is humiliation, physical assault, discrimination, and wrongful arrest." The room's air grew heavy. "But," the judge continued, "this court needs the full truth. I want the officers present in this room tomorrow morning, and I want Nexus Tech's executive board subpoenaed. All of them." A gasp ran across the benches. If a man who built a company is treated like an intruder because he doesn't look wealthy, Judge Caprio said softly, then something is very, very wrong. He banged his gavel once. Court adjourned until tomorrow. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom, a sudden shift rippled through the building. Cold fear for some, burning shame for others, and a rising storm the entire city would soon witness. Tomorrow, the truth would begin tearing open the layers no one wanted exposed. The next morning, Courtroom 3B felt different. Tense, electric, swollen with people who suddenly realized the case was no longer about a trespasser. It had transformed overnight into a story the entire city wanted to witness. Officers stood near the walls. Journalists filled every seat, and members of Nexus Tech's executive board, dressed in polished arrogance, sat stiffly in the front row. Judge Frank Caprio entered with a calm but unmistakable gravity. He adjusted his glasses, looked around the packed room, and spoke gently. "Let's continue." Marcus sat quietly with Alyssa, but tension rippled beneath his calm exterior. He saw the executives whispering, saw the security guards sweating, saw the police officers avoiding eye contact. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for truth. But truth has a way of shaking every wall that tries to contain it. The bailiff called the first witness, Officer Ray Morton, one of the men who handcuffed Marcus that night. He looked uneasy as he stepped up. Alyssa approached with quiet precision. "Officer Morton, can you tell the court why you arrested my client without asking a single question?" Morton cleared his throat, eyes darting toward the prosecutor's table. We were informed by security that the individual was causing a disturbance." Alyssa's voice sharpened slightly. "Did you see him causing a disturbance?" "No." "Did you see him assault anyone?" "No." "Did he threaten anyone?" "No." Alyssa walked slowly toward the jury box, letting her words cut through the room like needles. "Did he do anything other than stand still while security manhandled him?" Officer Morton's voice grew small. "No." The courtroom buzzed. She turned back. "So, you handcuffed a man? For being present? Nothing more?" Morton swallowed. "That's what it looks like." Judge Caprio tilted his head with sadness rather than anger. "Officer, I've seen thousands of arrests in my courtroom. I know the difference between an honest mistake and negligence. Think carefully. Was there bias involved in your decision?" Silence. A suffocating silence. Morton looked down. "Your Honor, it's possible we assumed he didn't belong there because of how he was dressed." A ripple swept through the courtroom like a shock wave. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." Alyssa turned to the next officer, Officer Green, whose jaw was tight as if cemented. She played the footage again, Marcus calm, the guard aggressive, the officers grabbing him without hesitation. "Officer Green," she said softly, "what exactly did this man do to justify your reaction?" Green shifted. "Protocol? Protocol?" Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "Or prejudice?" The word dropped like a stone into water. Judge Caprio stepped in gently. "Officer Green, a man was kicked, shoved, humiliated, and you arrested him instead of the assailant. Why?" Green hesitated, then barely audible. "We misjudged him." A hush fell over the room. Next, Alyssa called the most uncomfortable witnesses, 3 Nexus Tech executives, all of whom had laughed that night. The first, Tracy Milton, shifted nervously in her chair. I didn't know who he was." Alyssa nodded. "So you laughed?" Yes, but we thought—" "You thought he was beneath you," Alyssa finished, voice still calm. "Did it matter to you that he was a human being?" Tracy had no answer. The second executive, Daniel Cross, tried to defend himself. "He looked out of place. We thought he was some kind of intruder." Alyssa stepped forward. "Are intruders usually calm, quiet, polite? Or were you simply uncomfortable with a black man in simple clothes standing in your wealthy circle?" Daniel's face flushed beet red. He said nothing. The third executive, Lena Hart, trembled. We didn't know he was an investor." Alyssa's eyes softened. but her voice grew stronger. So, the respect you give someone depends solely on their bank balance? That's the culture of Nexus Tech? Lena whispered. No. But that night, we failed. Judge Caprio wrote notes for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned to the security guard, Evan Doyle, who sat rigidly, jaw clenched. Mr. Doyle, please take the stand. Evan swaggered up, trying to mask the fear behind his bravado. Alyssa folded her hands. Mr. Doyle, have you ever kicked a wealthy white executive out of a party without verifying credentials? No, he muttered. Have you ever kicked anyone out without speaking to them first? No. Have you ever assaulted someone who simply reached for their phone? He gripped the railing. I felt threatened. Alyssa lifted a brow. By a man walking quietly toward the hors d'oeuvres table? The courtroom chuckled uneasily. Judge Caprio intervened softly but firmly. Mr. Doyle, was this about safety or about power? Evan's face hardened. I did my job. Judge Caprio leaned in. Kicking someone from behind is not security protocol. It is cowardice. And arresting an innocent man because of how he looks, that is prejudice. The room was silent. No one dared breathe. Alyssa approached the bench. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence before resting our case. She pressed play on another recording, this one audio captured from the guard's body mic. The courtroom listened. Who even let this guy in? He looks like he's lost or broke. Kick him out before he bothers someone. Then Evan's unmistakable voice. Relax. He'll be gone in a minute. People like this don't belong here. The last line hung in the air with a sickening weight. Judge Caprio closed his eyes for a moment, as if holding back a wave of disappointment in humanity itself. When he opened them, they were steady, resolute. Mr. Hale, he said gently, tomorrow we begin hearing your side, your identity, your contribution to the company, and the damages you suffered. The court needs to understand the full scope of what was taken from you. But as court adjourned, something unexpected happened. Marcus turned to see his old friend David, who had invited him to the party. Standing at the door, face pale, holding a folder thick with documents. He whispered, Marcus, there's something you need to know. Something Nexus Tech's board hid from you, about your ownership, about your investment. Marcus froze. Alyssa's eyes widened. The courtroom buzzed. Judge Caprio paused mid-step. A secret, the kind that rewrites everything, was about to surface. And tomorrow's session would no longer be just a hearing. It would be an explosion. The fourth day of the hearing began, long before Judge Frank Caprio entered the room. Reporters were already live streaming from the courthouse steps. News vans parked up and down the street. Commentators argued on morning shows. Social media exploded with the hashtag #SheDurst for Marcus. But inside courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was different, not loud, not chaotic, but tense. Like a wire stretched so tight it could snap at any second. Marcus Hale sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped, eyes steady. Beside him, attorney Alyssa Rowan quietly reviewed the documents David had brought the day before. She had spent the whole night analyzing them. And the deeper she looked, the uglier the truth became. Judge Caprio entered, and the room rose. He settled into his chair with a solemn expression, sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. Ms. Rowan, the judge said gently, you mentioned new evidence. You may proceed. Alyssa stood, holding the thick folder. Your Honor, these documents were hidden from my client for 6 years. They were recently provided by a former Nexus Tech executive, Mr. David Collins. David shifted nervously in his seat, knowing the room's eyes were burning through him. Alyssa continued. What we are about to reveal changes the entire nature of this case, legally, morally, and economically. She approached the bench and handed the judge a file. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses and began reading. His eyebrows slowly rose, then knit together. A shadow crossed his face. Ms. Rowan, he said softly, just how deep does this go? Alyssa's voice was steady but filled with controlled fury. Your Honor, Marcus Hale was not only a founding investor. According to these documents, he was contractually promised a 40% share of Nexus Tech in return for providing the rescue capital that saved the company. But after the company stabilized, senior board members rewrote the ownership structure, quietly reducing his stake to 28% without his knowledge. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Alyssa held up a paper. Here is the signed, original agreement. And here, she paused, raising a second sheet, is the altered version submitted to the SEC. Marcus's signature was scanned and copied. The board performed a fraudulent dilution of shares. Judge Caprio looked stunned. You're telling me the company illegally changed ownership percentages, and Mr. Hale was never informed? Alyssa nodded. Yes, Your Honor. They stole 12% of his company. David Collins stood slowly. Your Honor, I worked in their finance division. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to come forward. After what happened to Marcus at the party, I couldn't stay silent anymore. The courtroom buzzed with shock, but Alyssa wasn't finished. She pointed to the executives seated in the front row, Tracy, Daniel, and Lena, whose faces were now drained of all color. These executives knew Marcus wasn't some random intruder. They knew exactly who he was. They knew his name. They knew his contribution. And they also knew that exposing the truth might force Nexus Tech to return billions of dollars worth of profits to him. The room fell silent as every jaw dropped. Alyssa stepped toward the jury box. Her voice softened, deepening with emotion. And that is why. They let him be humiliated. Why they didn't correct the guard. Why they whispered instead of intervening. Why they pretended not to recognize the very man who kept their company alive. She turned toward Marcus, who sat still, jaw tight, eyes glistening but unblinking. They were protecting their own positions, their own wealth, their own false hierarchy. Judge Caprio leaned back, his voice quiet but heavy. This goes far beyond wrongful arrest. This is corporate deception of the highest order. Alyssa nodded. Exactly, Your Honor. And now, there is one more piece. She clicked a remote, and an audio recording began to play over the speakers. A voice, cold, confident, unmistakably Daniel Cross, said, Relax. The guy has no idea we changed the paperwork. And if he tries to push back, he'll look like a greedy investor. People will laugh him out of the boardroom. Another voice, Tracy Milton, joined in. He thinks he matters, but no one will believe him. He dresses like a nobody, acts humble. He'll never fit with us. And finally, the most chilling part came from Lena Hart, the woman who, hours earlier, had cried in the stand. If he ever shows up at an event, she whispered on the recording, security should just remove him. Make him think he doesn't belong. That's the easiest way to keep him quiet. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The executives stood, shouting, This is out of context. That wasn't supposed to be recorded. It was a private conversation. Judge Caprio slammed his gavel. Order, order. The room fell silent again. Judge Caprio fixed his gaze on the three executives. His voice was softer than before, but deadly serious. You deliberately orchestrated the humiliation of a man who built your company. You stole his ownership. You encouraged security to treat him like a trespasser. You enabled his wrongful arrest, and you profited from his silence. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Hale, you were not merely assaulted, you were betrayed. Alyssa stepped forward. Your Honor, based on these findings, we are filing motions for corporate fraud, shareholder theft, intentional infliction of emotional distress, physical assault, false arrest, racial discrimination and profiling, and a full audit of Nexus Tech's financial dealings over the last 6 years. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. It appears, he said, voice echoing across the silent courtroom, this trial is no longer about what happened at a party. It is about a company that built its empire on deception and a man who refused to be broken. Then he looked at the executives, now trembling. And tomorrow, I will hear every single one of you under oath. But as the courtroom emptied, a quiet moment settled between Marcus and David. I'm sorry, David whispered. I should have told you years ago. Marcus placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, voice low but steady. You told me when it mattered. A reporter's camera flashed. People outside cheered. Strangers shouted support. But Marcus walked past them all, deep in thought. Because tonight, he realized something. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was the beginning of exposing an empire built on lies. And tomorrow's testimony would shake the entire corporate world. The fifth morning arrived with a colder sky over Providence, as though the city itself braced for the truth that was about to be dragged into daylight. Crowds wrapped around the courthouse steps. News helicopters hovered above. Every major network carried a breaking banner. Nexus Tech executives to testify today in the Marcus Hale case. Inside courtroom 3B, the air was tight, thick with fear, shame, anger, and a quiet sense of justice rising like steam from boiling water. Judge Frank Caprio entered, and even the reporters stopped breathing. He sensed the atmosphere, let it settle a moment, and then spoke. Ms. Rowan, please call your first witness. Alyssa Rowan rose with a calm, lethal precision. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Lena Hart. Lena walked to the stand with trembling steps. Yesterday she had cried. Today she looked pale, like a person who had spent the whole night staring in the mirror, trying to recognize who she'd become. Alyssa approached slowly. Ms. Hart, yesterday we played an audio recording that contained your voice instructing security to remove Mr. Hale from any future events. Lena's voice broke. I was pressured. Pressured by who? Lena took a shaky breath. Then, with a terrified glance at her fellow executives, she whispered, by the board, all of them, especially Daniel. Gasps rippled through the room. Alyssa folded her hands. Please explain exactly what happened. Lena nodded slowly, tears forming. When Marcus invested years ago, we all feared he would become the majority voice. He wasn't like us. He didn't care about luxury, didn't want photos, didn't go to meetings. The board didn't respect him. Alyssa's voice softened but sharpened at the edges. So what did the board decide to do? Lena hesitated. They They called him the invisible owner, said he'd never fight back. They believed his humility made him easy to control. Marcus watched, jaw clenched, pain flickering behind his calm expression. Lena continued, voice trembling. One night, Daniel told us, if he shows up anywhere, embarrass him, humble him, make him feel small. At first I thought it was just dark humor, but then we started treating it like a plan. She looked directly at Marcus, eyes filled with regret. I'm so sorry. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Ms. Hart, did you personally believe Marcus was a threat? She shook her head. Never. He always treated people kindly. But the board said if he ever realized how much ownership he was supposed to have, he could take control of the entire company. They said humiliating him would keep him quiet. Alyssa straightened. No further questions. Next, the bailiff called. Tracy Milton. Tracy wore a mask of confidence, but her hands shook when she placed them on the Bible. Alyssa approached. Ms. Milton, you were heard on the recording mocking Mr. Hale at the party. Why? Tracy stiffened. Because everyone did. Alyssa tilted her head. Everyone humiliated Marcus. So you joined? Tracy snapped. Look, I didn't know he was the investor. Alyssa smiled, a soft, devastating smile. But you knew he was human, correct? The room fell silent. Tracy opened and closed her mouth, unable to answer. Alyssa continued. Did you ever instruct security to treat Mr. Hale differently? Tracy hesitated. Not directly. So, indirectly? A long pause. Yes. How? Alyssa pressed. Tracy exhaled shakily. We told security that if someone showed up looking out of place, they should be removed immediately. That's all. Alyssa let the words settle. Out of place? You mean dressed simply? Tracy swallowed hard. Yes. And black? Tracy's voice cracked. Yes. A low, angry murmur spread across the courtroom. Judge Caprio's eyes softened with disappointment rather than anger. Ms. Milton, this is discrimination. Tracy began crying silently. Then came the third executive, Daniel Cross. He walked to the stand like a man walking a plank, head up, shoulders stiff, arrogance barely holding together under the weight of exposure. Alyssa approached slowly, like a lion stalking a wounded animal. Mr. Cross, you were heard on the recording bragging about altering ownership documents. Do you deny it? Daniel swallowed. I was exaggerating. It was office talk. Alyssa stepped closer. Do you deny instructing security to remove Marcus Hale from events? Yes, Daniel said quickly. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. Then explain why his name appears in this internal memo. She handed him a document, where you wrote, if Hale shows up, treat him as an outsider. Do not allow him near board members. Signed by you. A memo sent to all senior staff. Daniel froze. His voice faltered. I didn't mean. Alyssa cut him off. You didn't mean to get caught? He glared at her, face red. Alyssa continued, voice steady. Isn't it true that you illegally changed Marcus Hale's ownership share? Because you feared he would become the largest voice in the company? Silence. Isn't it true, she pressed, that you mocked him behind his back for dressing simply? Silence again. Isn't it true that you encouraged staff to humiliate him so he'd never question the paperwork? Daniel's jaw trembled. I was trying to protect the company. Alyssa raised her voice, not loud but powerful enough to echo through every heart in the room. You were protecting your power, Mr. Cross, not the company, not the investors, and definitely not the man who put his money and trust into something you later stole. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Judge Caprio spoke softly but firmly. Mr. Cross, I advise you to answer fully and honestly. The consequences otherwise may be severe. Daniel's shoulders slumped. A long silence passed. Finally, he whispered, Yes, we stole from him. A collective gasp filled the room like a wave crashing against rock. Judge Caprio leaned back, eyes full of deep disappointment. This is shameful. But Alyssa wasn't finished. Your Honor, we still have one final witness. The courtroom stiffened. Alyssa turned toward the back, where an older man in a crisp suit slowly rose from the spectator seats. Ms. Rowan, Judge Caprio said. Who is this? Alyssa took a breath. Your Honor, this is Alan Hawthorne, the original CEO of Nexus Tech, the man who negotiated Marcus Hale's investment years ago. Marcus's eyes widened. He hadn't seen Alan in nearly 6 years. Alyssa nodded at the bailiff. Please bring him forward. The entire room held its breath as the former CEO approached the stand, shoulders heavy with secrets. Alan placed his hand on the Bible, then looked directly at Marcus. Guilt, regret, and sorrow etched into every wrinkle on his face. Mr. Hawthorne, Alyssa said, her voice perfectly steady. Did Marcus Hale save the company? Alan whispered, Yes. Did you promise him 40% ownership in writing? Yes. Did the board alter the paperwork after you resigned? Alan looked up, eyes shimmering. They did more than that. The courtroom leaned forward. What do you mean? Alyssa asked. Alan swallowed hard. They planned this from the start. Marcus's heart pounded. What planned? The judge asked gently. Alan inhaled shakily. They planned to take everything from him. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Alan continued, voice breaking. And they planned the humiliation, too. They believed if Marcus felt small enough, he'd never fight back. They believed he was too humble, too quiet, too invisible. Finally, he faced Marcus fully. I never stopped regretting it. I never had the courage to speak. I'm sorry, Marcus. I failed you. Marcus felt the weight of 6 years crush against his ribs. But he sat tall, breathing deep, refusing to let emotion break him. Alyssa stepped forward. Your Honor, this witness confirms everything. Fraud, conspiracy, humiliation, theft. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. This court, he said softly, has never seen anything like this. A trembling hush filled the room. But before the judge could adjourn for the day, something unexpected happened. The bailiff handed Judge Caprio a sealed envelope, delivered moments earlier. The judge opened it. His face changed. He looked up at the courtroom, and with a voice heavy enough to silence every whisper, he said, Mr. Hale, this letter is from someone you know, and it contains information that changes tomorrow's ruling. Marcus's heart stopped. Alyssa froze. David leaned forward in shock. Judge Caprio closed the letter slowly, and the entire courtroom waited for what would come next. The final day arrived like a storm the city had been waiting for. Providence Municipal Court was surrounded by crowds that stretched down the street, held back by barricades and officers who could barely contain them. News anchors delivered updates every 10 minutes. Social feeds overflowed with clips from the previous hearings. Every conversation, coffee shops, offices, taxis, centered on one question. What will Judge Caprio rule today? Inside courtroom 3B, the scene was unlike anything the judge had ever witnessed in his decades on the bench. Standing room only, cameras, reporters whispering updates, officers lining the walls, and in the very center of it all, Marcus Hale. Calm, still, dignified. as if every humiliation, every injustice, and every buried truth had carved him into something stronger than anyone expected. Judge Frank Caprio entered to a hush so complete it felt like the whole city held its breath. He carried the sealed letter from yesterday, its contents still unread aloud. When he sat, he looked at Marcus with a softness the courtroom wasn't used to seeing in judges. Then he looked at the executives, broken pride, trembling hands, eyes avoiding the front of the room. Before I deliver this court's findings, Judge Caprio began gently, we must address the letter submitted yesterday. Alyssa straightened. Marcus leaned slightly forward. Caprio unfolded the letter. It is from the medical facility where Mr. Hawthorne, the former CEO, has been receiving treatment. A ripple of confusion passed across the courtroom. The judge continued. Mr. Hawthorne is terminally ill. He requested that this letter be delivered to the court if anything prevented him from continuing testimony. The room stilled completely. Judge Caprio began to read. To the Honorable Judge Caprio, to Marcus Hale, and to all who hear these words, if this letter is being read, it means I am no longer able to finish what I started in that courtroom. I have carried guilt for years, but there is something I never told Marcus. On the night the board altered his ownership contract, they also drafted another document, a clause, one that tried to erase his rights entirely if he ever acted against the board, including taking legal action. I refused to sign it. So they forged my signature. Marcus, everything that happened to you, every meeting you were excluded from, every event you were quietly uninvited to, every whisper that you were unimportant, was part of a plan to steal your legacy. You were the company's savior, and they turned you into a stranger in your own house. I am sorry, Marcus. I failed you when you trusted me most. I pray this courtroom restores what I could not. Alan Hawthorne, former CEO, Nexus Tech. When Judge Caprio finished reading, silence gripped the room like a fist. Marcus closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek, not of weakness, but of release. 6 years of betrayal, dozens of sleepless nights, a lifetime of humility finally had a voice. Alyssa placed a hand on his arm. Judge Caprio folded the letter gently. Then he straightened in his chair, his tone shifting, firmer, heavier, carrying the weight of justice. This court has reviewed every piece of evidence, he said. Videos, audio recordings, internal documents, falsified signatures, corporate directives, and first-hand testimony. He looked at the executives. Your actions were not accidents. They were deliberate, coordinated, cruel. He turned toward the security guard, Evan Doyle. You assaulted a man who posed no threat. You kicked him from behind, an act of cowardice and prejudice. Evan looked down, shame swallowing the arrogance he once carried. Judge Caprio faced the police officers. You arrested a victim because of assumptions rooted in bias. You failed your oath. Then he returned his gaze to Marcus. And you, Mr. Hale. You showed more dignity in humiliation than your attackers showed in power. A hush, a heartbeat, a moment that felt bigger than the walls containing it. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel. I hereby dismiss all charges against Mr. Hale with prejudice. The crowd erupted, but he raised his hand for silence. This court further rules that Nexus Tech's board members engaged in corporate fraud, illegal share dilution, discriminatory directives, conspiracy to commit defamation, and obstruction of rightful ownership. Gasps, cries, cameras clicking like machine guns. As such, the judge continued, effective immediately, Mr. Hale is reinstated as rightful 40% owner of Nexus Tech. All unlawfully obtained profits over 6 years are to be returned to him. The board members responsible are to face criminal investigation. Security guard Evan Doyle is stripped of his license and charged with assault. The arresting officers are placed under departmental review. The courtroom shook with emotion. Justice roaring like thunder at last. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He leaned forward, speaking not as a judge, but as a human being. Mr. Hale, the world judged you by your clothing, by your silence, by the humility you carried like a badge of honor. They saw a stranger, but you were the very foundation beneath their feet. Marcus swallowed hard, eyes shining. You are owed more than money, Caprio said softly. You are owed respect, and respect begins here. He struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. The crowd exploded into applause. Reporters surged. Supporters cried. The executives sat frozen, ruined by their own cruelty. Marcus remained seated for a moment, breathing deeply as the noise swelled around him. David approached first. It's over, he whispered. Marcus shook his head gently. No, it's beginning. Alyssa smiled through tears. You didn't just win, Marcus. You revealed the truth. Marcus stood slowly. The doors opened. People clapped as he walked out, no longer invisible, no longer humiliated, no longer erased. He stepped onto the courthouse steps. Sunlight broke through the clouds. A reporter shouted, Mr. Hale, what do you want to say to the world? Marcus paused, looking out at thousands of faces, some cheering, some recording, all listening. With quiet strength, he said, never judge a man by what he wears. Judge him by what he builds. The crowd erupted, and in that moment, on those courthouse steps, Marcus Hale finally reclaimed everything they tried to take from him. His dignity, his legacy, his name. And the city would never forget it. And that was the day America learned a lesson it will never forget. A lesson that stripped away prejudice, exposed corporate greed, and proved that dignity can't be stolen, no matter how hard the world tries. Marcus Hale walked into that courtroom a victim, but he walked out a legend. If this story moved you even a little, hit the like button, subscribe for more powerful real-life courtroom stories, and comment below which country or which state you're watching from. Your voice helps these stories reach millions. See you in the next story.